Welcome back to the Nine Line Podcast. We have a very special guest on today for the second time on the Nine Line Podcast. We got Nick Laidlaw. He is a author and also the account manager for Battles and Beers. He is also an author of What War Did to Us, volumes 1, 2, and 3 is coming out, correct, Nick? Soon?
Yep, 3's coming out soon.
Yep, 3 is going to be coming out soon. Good friend, an amazing journalist, great author. Super pumped to have him on. We're going to talk a lot about what's going on in Israel. Nick went over to Israel after the October 7th attacks and recorded a lot of stories of what was going around Gaza and in Israel. And he's going to talk about that experience and kind of how it relates geopolitically. And honestly, it's a very huge, relevant topic in today's world. So, Nick, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Really glad to be back.
Absolutely. So what what did you know about Israel before you even took off? Like what did you know before the October 7th attacks? Like just kind of what's going on between the Palestinians and Israelis, Gaza Strip, West Bank, all that stuff.
So I remember in the Marine Corps, I went and did some training in Israel in 2015. It actually just popped up on my Facebook memories that I was there. I knew prior to October 7th, very little, a little bit more than I think like your average Westerner. But in the grand scheme of things, it's an incredibly nuanced and complex conflict. And trying to explain it in a clear and cohesive way without majorly upsetting the majority of people on both sides is definitely not a task that I think I am up to, but I think I knew enough to be moderately informed and not very surprised that the events of October 7th did kick off. I learned far more about it being in Israel than I did beforehand.
Yeah. So especially capturing the stories, like how did you manage to get over? And, I know a lot of people were trying to get out, a lot of Americans. So what was your story of, actually getting over there and being able to capture these stories?
So getting over was, it was a challenge. Especially because I saw like tons of people were trying to get out. And they were having difficulties. So one airport was working in Israel, and it was the airport at Tel Aviv. So my assistant, Rudy, he's a Jew and a Russian speaker and stuff like that. So we worked together before on other projects for B&B. He actually found a privately chartered flight on the East Coast that was bringing IDF reservists from the United States to Israel. And so we managed to get 2 spots on that flight, and it was pretty great because it was basically just like 150 guys who had nowhere to go for 30 hours other than being interviewed by me. And it was honestly pretty and just going to Israel was a pretty incredible experience for me. So I flew out, I think it was like a Thursday or something like that, to the East Coast, and the directions were very vague. Because this was like the National Day of Jihad or something, the International Jihad Day, and so there's a lot of security going on. The whole flight was very hush hush sort of thing. So like we didn't know what airline we were going to be on, like what flight, anything like that. And so I just got told, be in this part of the airport at this rough time, and these people should meet you there to get you on the plane. So I was the very first one to arrive, and one by one, these guys came up to me, and they'd have, like they looked like they were soldiers or like were recently soldiers. So like mild faded haircuts, like brand new beards, stuff like that. And they'd come up and shalom. I'm like, I don't speak any Hebrew, man, but I'm here for that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, one by one they were showing up, and it got quite emotional observing these people. A lot of them were saying goodbye to their families and stuff like that. Husbands are getting dropped off by their wives and kids and saying goodbye to them. And we ended up spending the entire night in the airport, in one of the terminals, just like 200 of us. And then we eventually did get on the flight and made our way to Israel. That's when I hooked up with Willie OAM as well. Right about that time, we were communicating. He's a big YouTuber as well, big on Instagram. He's been in Ukraine a couple times. Australian guy, fantastic human being, one of the best guys I've ever met. I got to work with him a lot in Israel. But he and I started communicating a lot that same time, and flights were getting canceled in and out of Israel like constantly. And it was basically like you had to fly to somewhere in Europe and sit at that airport and just try to snipe a flight as it became available to go to Israel. And that's what Willie ended up doing. And it's basically what I ended up doing as well in the end. All of us just basically rented one airplane after the other to get to Israel, and we landed in Tel Aviv, I think, on the 15th.
Okay. So, I mean, so you guys end up getting there on the 15th. I mean, so this is about a week after the attacks. With those guys getting on those flights, I mean, like I said, those emotions were pretty high. What were their thoughts on this? I mean, it was quite a unifying factor. I know a lot of people have been, especially in the last 4 weeks now. It's like basically their 9/11, but actually probably much more impactful and much more, it means a lot more opposed to like kind of like what we went through on 9/11. And that's what kind of, some people that are Jewish and that are Israeli are like, no, this is something bigger because it is the remnants of, calls for the Holocaust. It is a remnants of, it's not so much they hate the way of life, but it's a call to wipe them out. And that kind of hits the nerve of, a lot of obviously all Jewish people, especially after World War II. I'm sure, I learned about the Holocaust and whatnot. So what was that feeling like with them? I mean, they're like, we're going at it and we're going straight into the fight.
Yeah, I interviewed around 30 guys on the flight there, and not a single one conveyed any emotion to me that he didn't want to, in some way, shape, or form, participate in the war that had already begun. And so a lot of them did voice concerns that they didn't know if they were going to be able to accomplish what the Israeli people wanted them to accomplish, if that makes sense. Like how do you get revenge? Like at what point is it, yep, we've done our revenge, like we have met that quota. A lot of them were concerned about that, or like how far it was going to go. But as far as it being the Israeli 9/11, that's very much what it was described to me by people in Israel and the troops as well. And your point earlier about it being almost more impactful than our 9/11 is, I would argue that it is, because so much of it was like live streamed. We saw it as it was happening, and the brutality involved as well. Like 2 planes crashing into some towers is absolutely horrific, right? But like we weren't witnessing POV footage of like what was going on inside the towers. So I've seen footage of like a young man being beheaded by a shovel, and families being shot in their beds, and grenades being thrown into bomb shelters and stuff like that. And it's just horrifying footage to watch, and the whole world watched it. And so it's going to have a bigger impact on the individual when you see the violence that was displayed, and then the especially coupled with the Hamas elation at those acts of violence as well. Because in all the videos you hear the classic terrorist tagline, those 2 words that we all know so familiar. And so yeah, it's definitely the emotions were very high. Everyone definitely wanted revenge, and it was also a very somber mood as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. So, were they mostly like Israeli Americans that were going, like, were they dual citizenships that you were with? So they were.
Yeah, most of them were Israeli Americans. Some of them were Israelis just on vacation. So they were primary Israeli citizens. They spoke Hebrew as a first language. but then there were a lot of them were Israeli Americans, and so they had done their 2 years in the IDF, be put on reserve status, and then they came to the United States. I met a guy who allegedly gave up like his $6 million business to go back to Israel and to be a reservist and fight as well. He's in Gaza right now.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
That's wild. So, like I said, I imagine their kind of emotions are all over the place. I mean, like I said, the brutality of the attacks, we all watched it. And like I said, with 9/11, it was brutal that we watched everything, but the systematic killing and liquidation, essentially, and genocide of like, it's not even like military targets. You know, these are civilians, specifically target civilians. And more stuff is coming out, which I'm sure you were aware of. And there's a lot of footage that still isn't being shown to the public for criminal investigation wise, a bunch of other stuff. And then I know that, you know, because it's a huge, it's basically, and you know, engulfing the world right now. But even like Gal Gadot and she knows a film director that's showing all the raw footage, which I imagine stuff that's not even on the internet, that they have a hold of, and they're premiering it, and they're like, this is what Hamas does, this is what Hamas did, you know. So that brutality, I mean, that is something that's kind of, like I said, unprecedented. Like 9/11, we watched the towers fall, but you didn't see, you know, children being burned, you know, innocent people being shot in the head, raped, all those things. I mean, like, and you're seeing the results of that. I mean, like, we're used to it. I shouldn't say used to it, but I've seen stuff like that before in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you have fought in the wars the last 20 years, that's nothing new, you know, bodies being dragged off, hung, mutilated, you know, seeing the German Israeli, you know, and being carted off in the back of a truck, you know, and that was, I can't remember her name, but, and everyone was like, oh, she might still be alive. Like, no, she's not, you know, she's not, you know, and sadly they finally confirmed it, I think in the last like 2 weeks.
Yeah. It was very recent that they found out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Hamas was messing with the family or something. They said like she was alive, and they're like, everyone's like, no, sorry, she's not, you know? And, so you kind of see like that stuff, and honestly, it brought everything that we have done in the last 20 years. It feels like now the GWAT quote unquote's over, you know, as we might want to call it, GWAT 1.0 is over. It's like this whole attack threw everything back in everyone's faces in the social media era, and it's undeniable. And it has put a rift into Western culture, you know what I mean? Like, so I mean, like, you know, the stories that you're gathering, it's like, it's incredibly important, because that was kind of the same stuff that the Jews had kind of gone through with the Holocaust. You know, at one point I was in film school and we watched a Holocaust, a film from a French filmmaker who was actually at the concentration camp, and he like did they got a hold of all that footage, and then he made it. It was like in the 1950s. I mean, this wasn't even like 10 years on. And it was pretty brutal footage, you know, and he made it back then because they were already starting to forget or trying to downplay what had happened in the Holocaust. And seeing, you know, like I said, this footage being thrown into the forefront, and the live streaming and the social media, you know, the impact on the Western world is, you know, pretty significant, you know. And if you always kind of feel like it's weird because people are starting to take sides, you know, and you shouldn't really have to, and whatnot. So when you guys got on the ground and whatnot, how was the situation? You guys, you know, I know you were taking some rockets from Gaza and all that kind of stuff. So what was that experience like, seeing the Iron Dome just rocking every hour?
So when I landed, it was in Tel Aviv, and so Tel Aviv is more like in the middle of the country, and life there mostly had not changed. There were more soldiers around. There were a ton of like IDF posters and soldiers patrolling and stuff like that. But for the most part, you really couldn't tell that there was a war going on. And we took a train down south to Ashkelon. And as soon as you get to Ashkelon, you can tell immediately, especially that early in the war, that there was a war going on. Ashkelon is like the biggest city you can get south that is like closest to Gaza. It's like 150,000 people, something like that. And when I got there were maybe 30,000 people left. And so most of the streets were just abandoned. I'd see more police and soldiers walking around than people. a lot of stray animals of people who just like left their dogs or cats around. There was a cat actually that stayed in our Airbnb that was someone's. Don't know whose it was, but it stayed with us for the duration of the time we were there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was just a very interesting vibe when you got there. It was kind of like Ukraine in the early days where like everyone was kind of unsure about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were still Hamas infiltrators in the area too. And so even up until I left, because you got to remember there were thousands of them that crossed the border, and not all of them made it back. And so they were around too, and people were very cautious of it. There was one time I almost got shot by the IDF trying to get some good footage of Gaza. I'll get to that later on, but yeah. And so the very first night, I'm unpacking my stuff in the Airbnb, and I hear this air siren, and I'm thinking back to Ukraine. I'm like, oh boy, like here we go again. And I'm like trying to stand on my balcony, but at the same time, like get my helmet on and my plate carrier on. And I see this police car stop by the beach, and there's like 5 or 6 tactical cops. So they're like wearing like those onesies with like plate carriers, helmets, and stuff like that. They all jump out of the car. They take cover behind a low wall, and I'm trying to like film them. And at the same time, there's explosions going on above me, and I'm like, oh my God. Like, and this was like our first day in Israel. It's like, okay. Like, and so that was a good like introduction to Israel, like the good first day. Saw the Iron Dome in action and stuff like that. But then other than that, it was very difficult for me as an independent to get access to go to places I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
beforehand,
like press in general was pretty tough. Like even in like
yeah.
Fox News, and like see it like they're not letting anyone in like at all. Or,
yeah. So you can imagine how independent press like myself was treated.
Yeah.
So I had applied for they call it a GPO credential card. It's their press pass basically. So yeah, they took my money, took the application, and then they denied me like 2 days later. They're like, no, you're not a journalist. And it's like, bro, like,
yeah,
I share more stories than like all of Fox News combined about Ukraine.
Yeah.
So
what I imagine it's just the short notice of it. Like, oh, you want to be a journalist right now?
yeah. So it was very difficult to get access to go to places that I wanted to go.
Yeah.
It's not like Ukraine where it's like you can go wherever your courage allows you to go. Mm-hmm. Right. This was very much like, okay, there's a military checkpoint. If you try to go past this, we'll shoot you. Like you're not getting in here. That's why everyone would be like, why don't you go into Gaza? It's like, well, I'm not going to run through this IDF checkpoint to then get to like a 30-foot tall fence and then hope Hamas has mercy on me as I'm running through their territory. So it was very difficult to get access anywhere. The best place I did get access was in the village of Sderot. It's like a town of like 25,000, and it's like right next to Gaza. There's an overlook there. I spent a couple days with IDF troops who were manning positions there, and I put a video on my YouTube of just like one of my average nights there. And are taking IDF anti-tank missiles, Hamas drones and stuff like that. And so there, like, it was moderately kinetic from like a journalist perspective, where you could see a lot. Like I watched hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of bombs get dropped on Gaza from that position in Sderot.
Mm-hmm. And then Sderot, was there a lot of Did a lot of that take like October 7th take place in Sderot, or is it in different villages?
Yep. So Sderot is one of the towns that Hamas had made it to, but they didn't like conquer it. And so there were signs of fighting everywhere. Like there was a lot of houses that were completely trashed. There was like bullet holes all over the place. There were there's IDF bunkers, like bomb bunkers everywhere in Israel, like everywhere. And they're all like painted with like dogs on them or something like that. So in Israel, there were like IDF shelters everywhere, and they were like painted to like make kids feel better about them being around. So there'd be like cartoons painted on the sides of them and stuff like that. And there were like grenade shrapnel like inside of them, like bullet holes and stuff like that. But there was one that I remember thinking like, okay, these are very well constructed bunkers, or like Hamas has really, really low grade rockets, because there was like a very clear rocket impact that had hit the bunker directly, but it didn't like damage much of it. It just like chipped a bunch of paint off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, and then, so you saw in Sirot, there was just a lot of fighting. Was there a lot of people killed in Sirot, or was that kind of like as far as they made it and then kind of got pushed back?
There were people killed in Sderot. It was a town that like they didn't conquer, but they were like running around in there and stuff like that. There was actually a kid. There was actually a kid on one of my live streams. He was riding around on a bicycle and stuff like that at night in an evacuated town. So I stopped him and I talked to him and I was like, "Hey man, like what are you doing here?" And his sister was murdered in Sderot that like on October 7th, and he was just hanging around because he stayed back, left his family, the surviving members of that. He stayed back in case Hamas came back because he wanted to fight them.
Oh,
and this
shit.
kid was like 16, 17. And so there was a pretty decent amount of fighting in Sderot. I have bullet casings that I picked up from there, and then we actually found 3 Palestinian ID cards in a ditch next to a whole bunch of expended like 7.62 and like 5.45 ammunition.
Really?
Yeah, and so we don't know if they were like affiliated with Hamas or anything like that, but we did turn them over to the local police and stuff like that, and they were pretty interested in like seeing that, because this like where we were at that time was like one of the active scenes of like a shootout. So like there were very obvious like signs of like this being a two-way gunfight, and we found these 3 IDs thrown in a ditch while we were there.
So, especially with the Israelis, I mean, obviously this everything going on in Gaza and the Palestinians, how do they feel about it all now? Because literally, you know, as like I said, over the last few weeks, you're hearing about, you know, even Israelis, you know, are you know, the super liberal ones or whatever. They lived next to Gaza, were very accepting of the Palestinian people, and a lot of the workers that had basically gotten, like what I understand, work visas to go work in Israel were the ones that basically rooted out the people that they worked for. And as Hamas went through and killed them, like they wrote the plans out of their homes and stuff like that. So what are their general attitudes now towards the Palestinian people? I mean, it's kind of hard to separate. You know, here in the U.S. and the West, people are, that's a hard question people are trying to ask themselves, because that's like saying, you know what, I don't support the Nazis, but those Germans are pretty good people, though. You're like, you know, this is really hard to separate. Everyone wants to separate them. You're like, that's really, really hard to separate. Like, this isn't some crazy, you know, it's one thing to say, yeah, there's like 100 KKK members in the U.S. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but that's not the U.S.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the government. That's not some wild, you know, or like some crazy huge group or something like that. Like, but you're dealing with, you know, people that support this, people, you know, and then the people that they consider friends, you know, participated in the murder and this attack. So what were they, you know, how do the Israelis feel about that? They're like, hey, we were trying to be nice, you know. Obviously there's always tension there, there's always, you know, arguments and whatnot, but it's like, yeah, these people helped, you know, they worked on our land or whatever, they worked with us, and now they murdered us, they murdered my family. So how did, you know, it's like a betray of trust almost, you know. Well, it is actually. And so what were the Israelis feeling? Like, what was their overall feeling about it?
Dude, they're pretty bad. They're pretty pissed off. Understandably, even like Muslim Arabs living in the rest of Israel who aren't Palestinian. You know, I met a couple guys who were Muslim Arab in the IDF, and even they were like, "That's some messed up. Like, it doesn't represent Islam, sort of thing." And so, as far as the view of the Palestinian people as a whole, I guess it's a mixed bag. I spoke to some Israelis who just want to turn all of Gaza into a parking lot, you know, And then I spoke to some other people who can understand that there are like normal people just trying to live their lives inside of Gaza who are, again, like so many people in other parts of history, they're just kind of, they can't help being born where they're born,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of wrapped up in the events around them. And that's definitely the case for a lot of people in Gaza. But then you also cannot ignore the support for Hamas. And I'd like to go on the record that I do not support Hamas at all. I think they're literally ISIS 2.0. They're terrorists, and there's no other way to describe them, is that they're terrorists. So no sympathy or support from me. However, I can empathize with some of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
But you also cannot ignore the huge numbers who were totally in support of the events of October 7th. And so a lot of, after Hamas broke through the fence, a lot of the people who did the raping and the killing were normal Palestinian people, like normal civilian guys who saw an opportunity and they went over. A lot of the infiltrators who were left over afterwards were those civilians. They caught one like literally 300 meters from me one night on a live stream. Because we were asking questions like, why are there flares going up on this side of the border, like 200-300 meters from us? And it was because there was one of those infiltrators trying to get back into Gaza.
Oh shit!
And,
so it is pretty hard for them to even get back. Like, so I've never been there, and I've heard that there's the wall. So I'm just kind of working off of like what I've seen on the internet. So it's like they like really have to work to get over and to get back.
Yeah, and they have to get through like thousands of IDF soldiers. I believe that most of them tried to seek sanctuary deeper into Israel. Like if I was trying to survive, evade, resist, and escape, I would try to get as far away from Gaza as I could until the whole thing cooled down. But back to earlier, there's audio of a Hamas fighter calling home off of I believe it's an Israeli cell phone who he's just killed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quote me on that. I think that's what I read. And so he called home and he's like, "Mom, Dad, I just killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Like, look what your son did." And his mom and dad were like, "Oh, like, praise God. Like, we have a son like you," stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so there are tons of people in Gaza, and you can't deny it, that want to just kill as many Jews as they can.
Yeah.
And then that brings up the other thing. It's like, so like free Palestine, right? Well, what does that mean? Like, because they want either one of two outcomes that I have observed running B&B and speaking to people. They want either all the Jews to pack up their bags and leave Israel. So they just want them to forget that they have an ancestral claim to that land as well and just go somewhere else. Or they want them all to die. And both of those routes of the free Palestine are just completely unreasonable.
Yeah. And I think that's something too. I mean, like I said, the last few weeks, it was kind of crazy when that all kicked off, and then the last few days, and then the days following, I had, family members that were like, "What's going on over there?" Because, unless you really kind of dive deep into it, but even people understood, like they knew that they're like, okay, these are bad people. Like you went around raping, murdering, and shooting innocent civilians,
Mm-hmm.
and like it really showed the rest of the world, how horrific Hamas is. And then when people start diving deeper into what's going on in Gaza, it's I agree with you. I think it's really hard because there's so much support for them, and they spent billions upon billions of dollars to build rockets. They had a propaganda moto video, as we call a moto
Mm-hmm.
video, ripping pipes out of the ground and being like, "Check out what we did," and made a shitload of rockets. Yeah. And it's like, so they're just blatantly telling people, we did this, like proud that we fucked up our whole, water piping system for Gaza. And then people are like, I can't believe that the Israelis aren't supplying water to the Gazans. And you're like, at what point is it Israel's problem? And like I said, you can kind of get into it, but it's really hard to kind of see that. And I always said this twice now, and about World War II and like current events. It's like when Ukraine kicked off and when I got back and how people talked about it, I was like, oh, I kind of realized how World War II happened. Like I get when people just ignore shit. And they're like, that's not our fucking problem. I was like, well, yes, it is our problem. Ukraine is our problem. You know, it is something that we need to nip in the butt. And after the last centuries of war, it's better to stop something and spend the money than to get drug into a world war. I mean, we saw what happened twice, and along with like Vietnam and Korea, you know, like all these things. And then now that I've seen October 7th, the events that it's like now you can see how the Holocaust happened. You know, even in the Western aspect of things, they're like, well, the Palestinians just, you know, they had a reason to. You know, you start seeing this rhetoric coming back, which we never dealt with as kids. Like, we knew what the Nazis did were wrong. We know the Holocaust is terrible. Like, you know, people that want a systematic liquidation of any race or any, you know, religion is wrong. And now you have people justifying it and like trying to brush it off. And you have nations, clearly Arab nations, that are not fans of Israel, that do the lip service to Hamas. Now you can start diving into geopolitics and like, you know, they don't want anything to do with the Palestinians, you know, so it is lip service, you know, but you start to kind of hear people, you know, that say free Palestine. They're like, but they can't bring themselves to say that Hamas is a terrorist organization. Like, and this isn't just fringe people. These are,
this is normal.
This is normal talk.
Normal
and like
people.
Even on college campuses, like U.S. college campuses, like it's some disturbing shit. You know, it was one thing when people were like, oh, wokeism, and then you have, you know, the political divides, but this is like whole nother level of like, oh, I get how the Holocaust happened. Like, you're blatantly supporting, you have no idea what you're talking about, but now these are the ideas that led to the Holocaust.
Yeah, they're excusing atrocities to validify their own beliefs.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's crazy to see that play out. Like I said, I was in Ukraine. When I came back, you know, everyone's like, why do we give them money? Who gives a shit about Russia? It's like, well, the Russians are absolutely murdering civilians over there. You know, they're absolutely hitting hospitals, you know, and Ukrainians are trying to defend themselves. And also there's a domino effect that happens if Russia takes Ukraine, or, you know what I mean? Like, if they just stomp through and we didn't do shit about it, because we've seen it. I mean, like, I was just speaking at the American Veterans Center. You see I spoke with the Marines of the Chosen, you know, the Chosen Reservoir, and I held that panel, and these guys literally freed South Korea. You know what I mean? Like, and we saw how that happened. North Korea is a shithole. South Korea is free. What does communism do? You know what I mean? It's right there in front of our face. And you see these things start to play up again. Like, well, why do we got to send troops over? Why do we have to police the world? It's like, because that's what you do. It's like, that's what you do it's almost like being the responsible adult to a bunch of teenagers. You know what I mean? I mean, and maybe not the best analogy, but it kind of is. It's like the U.S. is the adult. You don't like the decisions we make. We have a mom and a dad. You know, people run to mom, people run to dad, but we keep that structure and we keep that security blanket for the world. You know, when bad shit's happening, like in Ukraine or in Israel, we have to step in and we have to do something about it. Like, we have to send carrier groups over so that literally Arab nations don't wipe off Israel off the map because they are Jews. Like, that is a genocide, you know, like, you know, the only difference is that they, you know, fight back, opposed to like the Holocaust, when everyone was, you know, that was a different deal of like, well, you know, it'll work out. It'll be okay. They're just putting us in ghettos. They're just doing that. And then it's a downhill effect, you know, and, you know, at least they have weapons this time to defend themselves. And also the mentality of, like I said, never again. But it's crazy to see in the 21st century, hey, these ideas can lead to a Holocaust, and you understand how it did. And I think that's a bit, I don't want to say shocking, but it is a bit shocking. You know, like I said, we have the political divides in the U.S., but now you see that, like, that political ideology put into effect of like, oh shit, yeah, this is how this happened. This is how we got into World War II, and this is how the Jews were liquidated. And not just Jews. I mean, you talk about like the Armenian genocide. You talk about other genocides that happened. I mean, when we were kids, you had the Rwandan genocide. No one heard a peep about it. You kind of like things here and there of like, yeah, like, what's who, you know what I mean?
Hear
like,
about it until I was an adult.
Yeah, exactly. Like, same, me too. Like, it was like I heard about through the movie Hotel Rwanda.
Yep.
you know, like, that's how I found out about it. And or even like you, and you write now about the Chechen War. You talk about, you know, Russia and Chechen, like these crazy battles that take place in all these wars that all across the world that no one knew about.
Mm-hmm.
I think social media, definitely changes the game because we know about everything going on in almost in every corner of the planet. And but seeing on a in the West on a massive scale, I shouldn't say maybe massive, but it's always the loudest ones. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So when you see that in college campuses, like literally MIT is saying, "Hey, Jews don't come to class because you're getting through. Like it's safer for you to stay away." It's like, well, why aren't you kicking the shit out of these free Palestinian kids that are harassing Jews at MIT? Like, why are you not sticking up for the Jews? You know what I mean? Like, hey, you'll irritate the Palestinian supporters, so don't come to class that are calling for your eradication. So, did the Israelis have any thoughts on that, or you know what I mean? Like you said, you had American Israelis. Like, I gotta imagine it's fucking frustrating for them.
Yeah. So earlier today, I was talking to a guy, and he's an Israeli Jew, and he was telling me it's a weird combination of he's never been more proud to be Jewish, but he's also never been more scared, and he's never felt more persecuted as a Jew, but he's also never felt more supported.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's weird that like all of the like they see so much hate from one half of the world, but then so much like undying support from the other half of the world, where it's like we are not going to let what happened in the Holocaust happen again to you,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. And so the Jews of the world do notice um, the people in their corner. If anything, they're just ignoring the pro-Palestinian crowd, which
Yeah.
is arguably the best thing they can do because you're not. It's like all the time. I want to comment on Battles and Beers threads when I see these like huge arguments unfolding in the comments, and I just want to be like, one, don't stop because it throws me higher up in the algorithm, and
Yeah.
awesome. But two, like this is so pointless because none of you are going to change your minds.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I feel like whatever you saw first, like pro Israel or pro Palestine, that becomes like your truth, and then any information contradicting it is like a blow to your ego, sort of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like most of the people like supporting the pro Palestine one that I've seen, at least on the B&B comment section, are very uninformed about what's going on. It's like, okay, we'll name one city inside Gaza.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Like, what kind of government do they have? What is Hamas?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is I remember
It's
reading
just a
about,
cool thing, in
yeah,
the United States. It's a trend. Like
yeah,
a month from now, it's gonna be something else.
yeah. And I agree with you on that. I think anyone that just saw what happened and they're like, well, my friend said free Palestine, but then you like, if you like have half an intelligence and you start reading into it, you're like, oh my God, like, and I had friends too that were like, yeah, the Israelis can be assholes like over the last 17 years, like, they surround a fence around them. Like, I get it. Like,
Mhm.
I can
I get
understand.
it too.
Yeah, I get why the Palestinians don't like them, and I understand why some people have issues with Israel, like, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like, what's happened and what Israel's done over the last 75 years, even if you read a shred of history, you're like, they've given concessions after every single war they've had to be like, we don't want this anymore. Fucking have it. Like, like, we'll give you the Gaza. Well, like they took over the Sinai in
Yeah.
67. They took the
Yeah.
fucking Sinai. I mean, they
Yep.
could have kept the Sinai and been like, suck it, bitches. And they didn't,
They gave it back right after the war as a
yeah, they gave it,
concession.
yeah, as a concession. Exactly. And they took other territory and in fact, they're like, the Gaza Strip with the Palestinians, like they said, hey, we're willing to do all these concessions for you. And it's always just wipe the Jews out. The Palestinian government never wants to work with them on that. And like I said, they're out. It's not even like they're landlocked. They got to stretch it. They can do ports. The billions of dollars have gone into. They should be a thriving economy, like just absolutely crushing it. And they're not. They're in poverty, barely making ends meet. And I don't know if say shithole, Well, now it is. I mean, half of it's leveled, but like,
Yeah.
now it's definitely in dire straits. But like, you start diving into the history, and you're like, I don't know. Like I said, it sucks for them, but at the same time, it's like having a drug addict. Like it's just you keep going back to it. Like I can't tell you how many times to do the right thing and you don't do it. Or you
Yeah,
keep
I
going
would I
back.
would be
It's yeah, it's
I,
nuts.
I can definitely understand and empathize with Palestinian people, but
Hmm.
it's like you got to get rid of Hamas, man. It's
Yeah,
like that for me. It's like the ultimate deal breaker. It's like
yeah, oh yeah,
it's literally Hamas 2.0, and the thing is like they're just so terrible. Like they're literally terrorists, and it's like there's so
yeah,
much international support for them, and their propaganda machine works so well. Like today, I read. There was the IDF put out a video about they found one of the hospitals in Gaza. I don't remember which one it was, but they found tunnels underneath of it full of like
yeah,
weapons and stuff like that, and like hostages were being stored there, and there were tons of comments of pro-Palestinian supporters in it that like I don't believe this is true because Hamas would never like endanger the civilian population and stuff like that, and it's
yeah,
like I would watch rockets take off from densely populated areas within Gaza and come. Some of them came right at me, and then right after those took off, like maybe a minute or two, the IDF would respond with an airstrike in that location.
yeah,
So it's like, yeah, they're like bombing mosques and stuff, but that's because that's where the rockets are coming from.
yeah.
I,
Well, I think
I
too.
personally observed very few airstrikes that were taking place in parts of Gaza that rockets had not come from previously.
Hmm. And
And
that's
and
what
that's the thing too is
yeah,
like rockets are leaving all the time. All the time rockets are taking off. You can download the Red Alert app on your phone, right? And
hmm,
so every time a rocket takes off in Gaza, you'll get an alert and it'll tell you how long you have to seek shelter and where the rough point of impact is going to be.
really,
And so,
that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So but that also depends on where you are too. Like there were times in Sderot where I would watch rockets take off. They'd come right at me, and then I would be running to the bomb shelter, and then the siren would go off, and then once I was inside and there were impacts in Sderot, it'd be saying, "Oh, you should seek shelter," because it's so close. You have
Yeah,
roughly 10 seconds that close to the border.
yeah,
But so many of these rockets are being intercepted by the Iron Dome that imagine the damage they would cause to regular people if the Iron Dome didn't exist,
yeah,
right? So I feel like
yeah.
people are like completely removing that aspect of Hamas because it's not causing any damage because of how good the Israeli defense is.
Mm.
Okay, but so we're in Sderot because it was evacuated. They turned the Iron Dome off for that area because it's roughly $60,000 per missile fired to intercept a rocket that probably costs like $200 to produce, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's cheaper to fix a house that gets struck by one of these rockets than it is to shoot the rocket down. And so
hmm,
in Sderot, because it was evacuated and there was no one there but like two, three companies of soldiers and five stupid independent journalists. Um, there were impacts there all the time, and
yeah,
I'll send you some videos to use as B-roll for this of rockets taking off and stuff like that, impacts and stuff like that. Like
yeah.
after I
Absolutely.
left, Willie had an impact literally like 10 meters from him.
No shit.
Yeah, like where we were live streaming
Hmm,
in Sderot, a rocket like struck the ground like right there,
hmm.
like in the
Yeah,
exact spot that I was standing after I had
that's
left.
that's wild. And that's the thing too is I think, and you're seeing the IDF, and I'm sure you know about this on the ground. Which what I get it. Like when we fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, like I didn't want journalists anywhere fucking near me, especially like I hate to say it, the free, the freelance guys, and
Yeah.
they're not everyone was Sebastian Younger, which was like, oh yeah, we love these guys, especially in Iraq. Iraq was like everybody was trying to find the next war crime story to look and blow themselves up, and on New York Times. And
Mhm.
so I get why the IDF is like, we're not letting anybody in, and we're going to
Yeah.
release our footage as we go. And but you're seeing, I mean, it's not like they're making this shit up. You're seeing the rockets just in the. I remember seeing it was like a Boy Scouts camp area, like in a little gymnasium. It was a kids'
Mhm.
school, and there's just, I mean, an ungodly amount of rockets, like rocket pods, just aimed towards Israel, obviously, and
Yeah.
then in other places too that you're not understanding how hidden they were, and then the tunnel systems, and we can dive into that. I think that we could talk
That's
probably
interesting
hours on
too.
stuff, but yeah. So what were the concerns or the people that you were talking to while you were there? I know they hadn't quite pushed yet, but I know you're still talking with some IDF soldiers. How intricate is the tunnel system? How effective is it? Because I was kind of divided on how effective it could be, only because of how concrete and complex they are. Because once you level a building on top of an entrance, they're not digging themselves out of it.
No.
So yes, it's effective, but at the same time, it becomes highly ineffective because you're kind of restricted. But what are the IDF soldiers on the ground saying about the tunnels?
So that I've had some interesting conversations with, because the whole time I was in Israel, I was waiting for the ground invasion to start. And, you and I were texting back and forth on
Yeah.
Signal, like, oh, what's the update? I'm like, man, I'm being told again, like, oh, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. And then the day I leave, the ground invasion starts. And so I've got some interesting perspectives of like the command element, like the headquarters, like IDF headquarters perspective on it. I've got a guy in there chatting me up, and then as well as troops on the ground who are there blowing up the tunnels, going into the tunnels, because now they've been in there roughly 2 weeks, and so troops are starting to rotate out, and so they're like, "Hey, man, I'm not dead. Uh, I'm back. Would you have any questions for me?" Sort of thing. And so the tunnels, short answer, very effective. Um, the way it's been described to me, that this fighting is unlike anywhere else in the world ever, because of how compact the streets are and how massive the tunnel networks go. And so it's been described to me as different hives of tunnel networks that are all connected in some way, but there's like multiple tunnel branches that will come off of like a main tunnel vein, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so the way it was described to me, that in any part of the AO there can be as many as 5 entrances for every square, like 300 meters of ground. And so that's a ton of places to pop up, and they're everywhere too. They're in like the middle of like fields that farmers use and till and grow crops from. I've had IDF troops find tunnels in, like, I don't know the crop it was, but it was like some field that they found a tunnel in. It's like they're just all this tilled land, and then there's like a metal door on the ground that there's an RPG team coming through. And then it's really hard to find those. But they said it's easier to find the ones in cities because they can smoke them out a lot easier. And so when they find these tunnels, it takes anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to destroy them. And then before they do that, they use pressurized smoke in the tunnel first, and then they sit and observe for an hour if they see smoke popping up anywhere else organically, like not from like an airstrike or something, but like, oh, okay, there's probably an entrance over there's probably one over there, and that's how the engineers are finding it. And so they are making good progress fighting through Gaza. It's been described to me that there's very little like personnel casualties, vehicles. No one's talking about like vehicle losses yet. I have not personally seen a picture or a video of a destroyed Merkava yet. I'm sure there are a couple, but as far as like the Hamas claims that they've destroyed like 150 of them, I really doubt that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the direct hits from Hamas videos,
I've
but
seen the direct hits too, but I've also
yeah,
seen a lot of reactive armor
yeah,
hits
exactly, yeah,
and stuff like that too. And there's a reason they cut all the videos right after
yeah.
right after the impact.
Yeah. So the tactics these guys are using, are they going into the tunnels as well, or are they just like, fuck this, like we're smoking them? Okay, so like, what is there any stories or experience of those guys in the tunnels? Like, what have they found? Or okay,
not yet. If you would ask, if this would have been tomorrow, my source in the tunnels would tell me right now. Right now, he's sleeping, and then he's answering all my questions tomorrow.
Oh damn! All right, so about 12 hours too early.
Yeah, so he was one of the guys who like secret scroll kind of guy who like goes into the tunnels and stuff like that.
Okay, the rest of them we might have to have a follow on like 30-minute conversation tomorrow.
Yeah, we definitely can.
I'll tack it on to the end. Yeah, because some people would be like, "What the fuck? I want to know." You know, because I'd be like, "What? Come on, man." Yeah,
no, just imagine it's like a total like Call of Duty mission down there.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm just incredibly interested to hear it, because I mean these are tactics like the Ukraine war. Everything's incredibly evolving very quickly in the 21st century. It's old tech, or like basically old strategies now kind of like getting their update, like firmware update for the 21st century. And it's like, you know, you're talking about tunnel warfare. And I mean, we didn't deal with any of that in Iraq. I know in the Battle of Fallujah, I think there's maybe a handful of tunnels like from house to house, but there was, you know, that guys that you hear from our senior Marines or in books, but never like the massive tunnel system that, you know, which, by the way, it's fucking impressive.
It is. I'll give them credit. They're definitely one of the better asymmetrical fighting forces on the planet.
Yeah. And why don't you put that towards something else? I'm like, Jesus. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, that's super impressive. You know what I mean? Like, wow.
Yeah, some of the tunnels have chambers 400 meters deep.
What? 400 meters?
400 meters deep. And so there were times we'd be watching these airstrikes, and it's like the civilians up there are probably suffering horribly, but you know there's Hamas guys who they're not even waking up from their naps. They're so far underground.
And that's what I'm wondering too, is, I mean, have they, beyond the fighting stuff, I mean, has any of you guys talked about any, like, hey, we're smoking them out, or we're finding guys coming out of these, or like, you know what I mean? Like anything kind of like in that vein of, you know, we're just dropping grenades down and we're leveling this thing, or, you know, or any intel that's coming from Hamas, like, holy shit, this has been a bad idea, you know?
So one of the ways it was described to me is that they're not seeing a ton of face-to-face fights from Hamas yet. And that's for several reasons. The biggest one is that a lot of the military intelligence theorizes is that there's been a lot of losses in the chain of command. And so you've got like Hamas officers taking command over larger areas, and it's more difficult to coordinate these attacks and stuff like that. And so I've been told that they find like a lot of like pairs and like groups of like 3 or 4 like hunter killer teams armed with like 1 to 3 RPGs and stuff like that. But there's almost no like platoon sized elements that they've come across. No like proper firefights and stuff like that. It's all like hit and run hunter killer teams, stuff like that. And then basically whenever they like find where these guys are originating from, they're going to airstrike the area. Tanks will move in to soften up the area, shooting into buildings and stuff like that. And then the infantry will go in with the sappers and stuff like that and look for like entrances to the tunnels. And if they find anything, they investigate, see anything else around there, if there's any weapons caches, stuff like that, and then they just blow it up. Then move on to the next one.
So they're not even, well, I guess you'll find out tomorrow. So they're not even like, hey, let's maneuver ourselves through there. They're just like, we just collapse this thing and keep moving.
That's, most of the time, yeah, they're just collapsing it.
Yeah, because I imagine it's probably not a good thing if you're like the Air Force is dropping bombs and shit, and you don't want to get caught accidentally.
Yeah, because there's the danger that you're going to be like trapped in a collapsed tunnel as well, and also it's like, what's the real benefit of going down there?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and so that was the other thing I remember. See, again, like it was impressive. They were using landlines, you know, no cell signals or anything like that. They just like old school, pick up the telephone and dial each other. You're like, dude, old technology works, you know, like it's effective. You know, so, but like I said, it's you're saying, you know, they are effective or the tunnels are effective, but at the same time though, are they seeing, like I said, these fighters are moving more south? Because I thought I heard that today, where basically they're kind of like, oh shit, we need to retreat to the south now, because I mean they have it completely surrounded in the north, and like I said, a lot of these guys, it's asymmetric warfare, so they're going to drop their shit, act like they're civilians, and boogie on out to the next location.
And that
Are
would
they?
be
No, sorry. Go ahead.
that would be my guess as to what's happening. Like you got to think like the IDF is moving through Gaza faster than the Russians move through Bakhmut,
Mhm.
and so Hamas may be putting up valiant fights in some parts, but they're definitely not like stopping any IDF progress. Like you can see it on the map, like every day, like the IDF moves as fast as it wants to,
Mhm.
basically,
Yeah.
in Gaza at the moment. And so I would imagine a lot of the fighters, whether it's out of cowardice or they're being ordered to, um, leaving certain areas to stronghold up in other areas to fight
Mhm.
another day. Maybe it's like the Japanese style of warfare on Iwo Jima, where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we're gonna let them take this so we can all castle up on Suribachi later on.
Yeah. Yeah. And those thing too is I think I did hear, was it El Shifa Hospital? I don't, because they've surrounded it, or they
Mm-hmm.
gotten close to it. I think they're like right out the gate or something
Yeah,
like
they've
that.
left a humanitarian corridor through the east, so it's not completely surrounded. There is a corridor that Hamas could go through too if they wanted,
Yeah.
and they're allowing civilians to leave, which is another thing for like that genocide comment, like how the Israelis are genociding Palestinians. That I don't agree with.
No,
Where
no.
it's like
And
if you're they could just nuke it,
oh
gas
yeah,
it. They're not. You don't. If you're going to do a genocide in 2023, you don't send troops in to risk your own lives, right? Or you
exactly.
don't
Yeah.
give them humanitarian aid
Yeah. Or give, yeah, or corridors, and
or humanitarian corridors.
yeah, and give them gas for the hospital, and then offer to
Yeah,
take the wounded,
yeah. Do I
or
think
people at
too many
hospitals.
civilians are dying? I do. I
Yeah.
personally, I do. But you can't discount that Hamas is using them as human shields.
Yep.
Um, but also, I saw a lot of artillery get fired into uh, Gaza as well, and that's not pinpoint accurate either. When
Hmm.
returning fire on rockets and
Yeah.
stuff like that, rocket
So
origin sites. But yeah, like so, a lot of civilians are dying, but you cannot discount the fact that Hamas is using them as shields, and they are not letting them leave.
yeah, and I think that's kind of the worst part about it. And we can kind of go back to that into the Western mentality, like back into out of the warfare
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit, because you're seeing the differences in culture too now. Whereas people are happy to sacrifice their children and their loved ones, whereas in the West they're more, I'll go to sacrifice myself in hopes to keep my family secure. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember, you kind of hear about that with like the terrorist groups. They're like, like I said, that the mother or something like that. They're like, I'm glad, my son is killing Jews, and if he dies, I'm very happy. He's a
Mm-hmm.
martyr. And that's stuff that we dealt with, that type of psychology in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, for the GWAT, like this is nothing new to us. And a lot of people back then were like, oh, these are just the uneducated ones that got snatched up, like they were in a gang or something like that. I was like, no, they weren't. These were highly educated, in fact, sometimes American educated jihadists. They were very smart. So it's more than just an they don't have an opportunity. So they, some were, they're like, oh, here's $100, go put this IED in, but the actual hardcore fighters were actually very educated, and is an ideology that, it grips you. I always
Mm-hmm.
kind of told people, it's like, it's the same ideology, not the same ideology, but it's the same feeling that you get when you join the military to protect your country and to protect your family. Or the stories of heroism of saying, get the family out of here, I'm going to hold back. It's that meme that we always keep throwing up on the internet. It was like, the masculine urge to hold off the waves with a machine gun as your boys and your family can get
Yeah,
to a safe position.
it's a good
um
meme.
it's a great meme, but it is a mentality though that
Yeah.
we do have, opposed to, I'm going to keep my children here, and if they die, that's good, because then they can be martyred, and then people will sympathize with our cause. Like it is crazy. And like, I don't think people in the West are not as well traveled, or haven't been into these countries where sometimes the male doesn't always protect the family. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think I love Afghans, but there's times too you're like, hey man, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you on this plane and other people aren't? My wife would ask me that question, where we were trying to evacuate civilians and the family got left behind, but the male went. Now I understand the mentality of like he can go maybe get a visa, get his family. So there's something about that, but then there's other times where I'm like, you need to fucking man up and get your family on that plane and you stay behind.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that you're seeing it play out a lot, and it's not like under the radar. And it's kind of crazy, like I said, to see how that's again being brought into the main psyche of the West, like understanding your enemy, or understanding people that don't like you just for who you are. And like I feel like some people can't wrap their heads around that, even if they try to be like, well, the Palestinians, we're friends with them. It's like, they don't fucking like you. They don't want anything to do with you. They want you dead.
And that's the thing too I've tried to point out. It's like, if you think, like, if you were in Be'eri on October 7th, do you think Hamas would have passed you over? No.
Yeah.
Be'eri was Be'eri and Kfar Aza were two communities that like almost everyone was killed. Yeah. Right? Like Hamas had full reign there. And it's like all these people like who are supporting Hamas. It's like, if you were there on October 7th, do you think they would have been like, all right, I'm going to kill you, but you're cool. I'm going to leave you. Because they killed everyone. They killed Jews, Christians, other Muslims on those days, everyone. Yep. And it's like
the Nepalese, that was the guy, I think, with the beheading video. Like, I saw that. He's like a worker. Mm-hmm. He's just an immigrant worker, and they start.
And then the Nova concert too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, obviously.
I spoke to a lot of people who were there. I went to a healing center, like a healing center type of area. It turned out to be like a waste of time for my journalism, because the guy in charge of it was like very like gatekeepy, where it's like, you can't interview anyone here, but you can interview me, sort of thing. Oh yeah. Yeah, so there was like hundreds of people who were there, and I did get to speak to some off the record, and they just described it like a school shooting, man. Like mm-hmm. like people were drinking, having fun. A lot of them were high on LSD. A lot of the people who got kidnapped were people who were so high they didn't understand what was going on, and like came down in Gaza, and
that sucks.
Yeah. And so there's one girl, I just uploaded her story on B&B a couple days ago. She's got crazy video of like her boyfriend and her hiding under like a tree in like this shady forest. And there's like bullets snapping overhead, and you can hear Arabic off in the distance. And it's like 250 people died at that concert. And then there's like video walkthrough of the police afterwards, like body cam, like clearing the area. And there's like a drink stand, where it's like one of those like horseshoe shaped like counters. And then there's like coolers in the middle and stuff. And there's just bodies all over the place. Like men, women, workers, cops, just gunned down. And it's like, do you think like you're special? Like if you were there, they would have just passed you over? Mm-hmm. No, it's a terrorist attack. It's like the Vegas shooting at that concert, it's like that level of insanity.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I get done by like 1,000. That stuff. No, I agree with you. I think the fact too, that there was like, it wasn't just, two guys with AKs. It wasn't a group of 10 guys. It was 1,000. So it
was several thousand.
It's several thousand. So you're like, this is a highly coordinated attack, not against a military target, but against civilians.
See, and that's the thing insane. Too. It would even change my opinion if it was only military targets. Then I would be a lot more. I would never be pro Hamas, but I would be a lot more, I guess, sympathetic to the Palestinian people now kind of reaping what Hamas has sowed. Mm-hmm. If they just attacked military targets and police, I'll take police as well.
Yeah.
As far as the law of war, I'm not like condoning like terrorist attacks on militaries, but like it is different. It would look better for the laws of war if it's just police and military, but it wasn't. Is the thing. It was innocent. A lot of it was innocent people. Most of it was innocent people. And it's like.
And what was the Israelis' view too on how it all unfolded? I mean, I think we've heard a few, some good analysis of it was like, no one thought that they could carry it out this to
No,
this extent. Like the
no.
Israelis underestimated. Like Iran was like, yeah, whatever, let them fucking run. And then they were like, oh shit, this is not what we thought or expected or really wanted, because it's fucking up the whole peace process, or not peace process, but the whole the region, and
Hmm.
it's not good for Iran. It's not good for Hezbollah. It's not good for, anyone that wants to shoot a rocket towards Israel right now because the U.S. carriers showed up. So I feel like even the Iranians were like, oh shit, I think they overstepped their bounds. What were the feelings of the Israelis, like kind of, I won't say complacency, but did they feel like, yeah, this completely took us off guard? Or, I know there's a lot of stuff with Netanyahu right now with, a lot of people I think it's kind of like the 9/11 thing. They're like, the government knew. It's like, government didn't fucking know. They knew,
No,
like,
I
they
don't.
knew
I don't think
something
we
was going to
knew.
happen. Like, I imagine Netanyahu, they were like, yeah, something big's coming. It's like, well, yeah, they always fucking say that. Like, if you study 9/11, like, the Afghans were like, something's going to happen. But to what extent? No one knew. And then it happens. It's like, that doesn't mean that they could have stopped it.
Yeah.
So what was the Israelis' feelings on that?
The the Israelis are owning up to it. They're very much like, this was a very well planned operation. They completely took us by surprise. They got us with our pants down.
Yeah.
Like, it's changed asymmetric warfare. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was a group that they thought didn't have the capability at all to do something like this, and then they go ahead and like pull off like the worst terrorist attack probably in history.
I was going to say, I think
Um,
it's probably the worst one in
yeah, like
history.
they
Yeah.
use like paraglider, like hang gliders, like those motorized ones to like fly over the fence and get miles into um, Israeli territory. Like that girl at the Nova concert sent me videos from her phone
Mm-hmm.
of first a rocket barrage coming over, and then dudes like paragliding over them. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's
Which
one
is, you never
video.
see that. Yeah. They're
You
like,
never.
fuck
I thought
yeah.
it was like some weird. So because I woke up on October 7th, and the very first thing I saw on my phone was a picture of like a paraglider with a dude with a ski mask in it and an AK. And my first thought was like, what are the Taliban up to now?
Yeah. What
Like
craziness
what
have
are
they
they
thought
what
of?
are they
Yeah.
filming now
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
propaganda? And
Yeah.
then I kept reading, and I was like, oh my god, like they sent hundreds of guys like this because it wouldn't get picked up by the Iron Dome because they're
Yeah.
too slow moving.
Again, that's I don't want to say
And it was
ingenious, but
it,
it
it
is.
was a it was a
It's a
really
workaround.
well
Yeah.
planned operation, and most of the military was on leave because a it's a Jewish holiday, and the
Mhm.
holiday, as it was described to me, is basically like if you're Jewish, you're supposed to be like drunk on this day.
Yeah.
And so that's why like IDF response was so slow. All the outposts, all of them but one, I think, got overran.
Hmm.
And I spoke to two survivors who were at that outpost that didn't get overrun. It was a tanker, and they ended up killing like 100 terrorists with their tank and like two other tanks, and then an infantryman. And their two stories are just absolutely bonkers. Like the tank was running over people because they ran out of main tank rounds.
Jesus.
Yeah, the
That,
IDF came over on like mopeds and motorcycles dressed in, or not the IDF, the Hamas came over
mhm.
in mopeds and motorcycles dressed as the IDF with like RPGs on their back, like a horde of like 50 motorcycles coming across. It's like the orcs from Warhammer 40K
Yeah.
planned this operation.
That's crazy. I just saw that too yesterday about them dressing up as IDF, which would fuck up anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be like the civilians like, what the fuck's going on? And then like they're executing people. And then if you're a soldier fighting in this chaos and you'd think, oh fuck yeah, I got some boys on my, so here they are. And then they start shooting at you, or God forbid you get like within 10 feet and then you're like, oh fuck, these are not
Yeah.
friendlies,
Well, to
you know?
speak on that, I did talk to a guy off the record. He's a Muslim in the IDF,
Mhm.
and he speaks the language fluently. And during one of the firefights, I think it was on the first or the second day, he took off his uniform and then pretended to be one of Hamas to yell like, "Hey, come over here! Like, there's like a good spot over here." And then as they were all, there's like six of them crossing the road. The rest of the IDF guys popped up and shot him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was in Gaza.
No, not in Gaza. It was like on one of the border towns, the kibbutzes.
Oh, okay. When
So
they were
I think
like,
it might have been like Sderot or
okay,
something like that. One of
before
those
the battle
places.
kicked off, or like when they were doing cleanup or something like that.
Yeah, when they were cleaning up. So like when the
Okay.
IDF military had like got its shit together and then
Yeah.
moved down to kill and liberate, to kill Hamas fighters and liberate the kibbutzes that had been taken over.
Yeah. Okay. And so, what was there any stories that like, I mean, like, I was gonna say the of like crazy heroism of like, some of the guys, like said the outpost, was that kind of like the you know the last stand, and they got through it, the fighting off 100.
Mhm. Yeah. So there was another guy. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about how hard it is to get stories after this. So remind me that. So there's one guy, the terrorists had basically conquered the compound, and it was the like a couple IDF guys like in a couple rooms, like firing out of the rooms, guarding local civilians who had like made their way to the base as well. And they had like 12-hour gunfights with Hamas, and there were like 40 fighters to their 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's wild. So you say it's hard to get stories out of people?
Yeah. So one, like I'm independent press. So just getting access to certain areas was one, impossible for me. And two, if press was allowed there, it was even more difficult because I didn't have my press pass.
Mm-hmm.
And then the IDF active duty guys, they cannot speak to me or any press without authorization from like the IDF press office.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when I did get to talk to them, the stories would be like so watered down, because it's like I'm interviewing them, but there's like an IDF press guy, like
Yeah.
right here, like, are you sure that's what you want to say?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. It would be the same like in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talking to the active duty guys was extremely difficult. I had to talk to a lot of them completely anonymously and remotely too.
Mm-hmm.
So I did one interview with an active duty guy, and we had to go around his base into like a tree line behind it and do a voice recording.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards we like walked up, and I like gave like the gate guards like some cigarettes and stuff like that, try to like butter them all over.
Mm-hmm.
And then he still came out afterwards, and he's like, hey man, like they know I talked to you, you gotta like delete that off your phone, and I gotta like watch you delete it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of thing. I was like, dude, I get it, like it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of thing. Just because they don't want like they don't want bad press, because war is any war is a propaganda war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's that they don't want bad press. They want to be able to monitor what their dumb lance corporals are saying.
Yeah.
And
And that's the thing too, is I remember
I had a lot more luck speaking to reservists, because reservists cannot go to jail for talking to press like active duty can. And so reservists were easy to spot because they didn't have the same hair regulations, and they didn't have facial hair regulations. And so I'd go up to them and be like, oh, shalom, independent press, former Marine. Like I was in Israel 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, and then much more likely to talk. And I got way more stories from the reservists.
Mm-hmm. What stories do they have?
Huh?
What stories did they have, the reservists? Were they at that point, that was
pretty much nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
So
yeah.
me and my platform, I document stories of experiences during war.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got there, there were just like this small number that participated in the fighting on like the first 2 days. And that's it. Yeah. It's like a tiny, tiny group of me to pull from. And it's only guys brave enough to talk off the record or on the record anonymously, like, and remotely. And then you've got a bunch of civilians wanting to talk. But then most of those stories were all very, very similar, because it's just like what it's like to get like rocketed and stuff like that. And so you can only document so many getting rocketed stories before it's like, all right, like, am I wasting my time here, sort of thing. So that was like the biggest reason I left Israel when I did, because I was there for almost 2 weeks and nothing happened. And it was just difficult for me to document combat stories because the pool to pull from was so small.
Yeah. So did they show you some of the footage that didn't get released onto the internet with a lot of the attacks on October 7th? I know a lot of people have like, there's some channels that have it, but they said they haven't released a bunch for like the families. They don't want to go on social media. But then, like I said, there's like, I think people have gathered them over the last, few weeks, but I know it's not the easiest to come by, but I've heard, I don't know if I was talking with you, but
Yeah. So when I was
stuff that
there,
was there. Yeah.
yeah, and I was talking to you about it when I was there, and a lot of them did get access. Like a lot of the cleanup crew, I get cleanup crew. I don't know what to call them,
Yeah.
but they were there like cleaning up the bodies of civilians in these areas that had been massacred, and so I did get a lot of like at the time unreleased photographs. They didn't send them to me, obviously, because a lot of this is like building rapport and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I'll just look on your phone instead of like, hey, can you send that to me, a guy you don't know? And there were pictures of babies with like their heads that had been like shot off and stuff like that. So like I'm sure you remember like at the very beginning there was a claim like the babies' heads were cut off.
Yeah.
But like they weren't cut off, and it's like, well, what do you expect like a 7.62 round is going to do to like a baby's skull?
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
And also,
they didn't cut the babies' heads off; they just shot them off. And
that was super frustrating to watch because they're like, well, I don't know what to believe from the IDF now. It's like that's what really is that. That's
what you're
where you draw the
concerned
line.
about is how the babies died.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that they were killed at all.
Yeah, and exactly.
They didn't cut their heads off; they just shot them.
Yeah, exactly. And what was a 7.62 round to a child would do? I mean, you've seen it done to a grown man's head. And people in that situation don't know what the fuck to call it. You know what I mean? They're like, what the fuck?
And it's lost in translation too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So and the original report, because I follow that female reporter on Instagram, the guy is not a native English speaker. He speaks Hebrew, and he's speaking to someone in English, which is like probably his second or third language.
Mm-hmm.
So like naturally stuff is going to get lost in translation. But as a reporter, you should be like very clear and concise with what you.
Yeah.
Report.
Well, I think they were on the move pretty quick because I think I remember seeing some of those. Yeah, they were just like, this is what they're saying. I don't know what to tell you. This is what they're saying. It's. I imagine all that's pretty fucking rough though to be coming across and being like like I said, the documenting and kind of figuring all that out. I know they officially released the numbers 1,200 total.
Yeah,
because there's so many body parts that they thought there was more, and some were Hamas fighters that they figured out that they were the ones doing the killing. So yeah, I mean, I think you kind of go back to that where it is that frustrating aspect of you're like, well, Hamas, it was the same with the bombing of the hospital. Like I remember watching that footage and being like, that's weird. Why?
Yeah, we were talking about it that evening.
Yeah, I was like, I know what a JDAM looks like. It doesn't start cars on fire, and then it didn't even hit the hospital, and then
it hit the parking lot. It looked like
the
impact crater looked like impact craters I had seen myself from Hamas rockets.
Yeah, and I think that's frustrating hearing the press being like, you saw it on some people that obviously don't like the Israeli government and that were disappointed that it was not Israel that dropped the bomb and that it was, but they're like, we just don't know. We just don't know. And it's like, no, we do know because that's not a fucking 2,000-pound bomb crater, and also why the fuck would they care about like a parking lot? It's like they would have hit the hospital. Everybody talked about it. It didn't even hit the hospital. And so, and then it was 500 were dead. And then the international press ran with it. And, you had, and again, it's a very decisive point.
People in my comment section told me 3,000 died.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, I was kind of laughing because I was like, as much as I love Arabs, it's the same thing of like, you gotta apply the rule of like, when they say there's 300, just take that and divide it by 30, or like, we'd always come across that in Afghanistan. They're like, there's 500 on the original line. So it's like, all right, so there's like 5, like times it by 100. But, yeah. And that aspect of it, I think at the end of the day, again, it was like slid on the radar and people that followed up with it, there was like maybe 10 people injured in that. So this giant thing that sparked the international UN, the community of Israel bombing a hospital and killing 500 people turned into a few cars got set on fire. The Hamas launched the rocket and it failed. And then only 10 people were like injured. but that's
Yeah, I
like
remember that
completely
night.
under
It
the
was
right.
crazy.
Yeah, it was. They talked about it for like a whole week. It was a
Yeah,
massive, massive
I
talking
had
point.
just come back from the north saying hi to Hezbollah up in the north.
Yeah, yeah. How was that? How was the North? We haven't even talked about the North side.
So the north
Yeah.
was so the north is very much, if you want to like see combat up there, you kind of got to sit on a ridge line and just wait
Yeah.
and hope you're in the right spot to see it. But then also hope that the IDF drone doesn't see you and think, like artillery spotters that are Hezbollah,
Yeah.
you know? So that's a little difficult, but it's also like their rockets are like actual real rockets up
Hmm.
there that they've got. And so they'll do a lot more damage. But it was a lot like weird, like it was like a weirder, spookier vibe, if that makes sense, because Hezbollah is so much more powerful than Hamas. It's
Hmm.
like a standing like terrorist army, basically.
Yeah.
And at one point, we were like 400 meters from like known Hezbollah outposts out there. So there's that picture of me. I'm wearing like my blue shirt. It's nighttime. I got my helmet on and my plate carrier on. I'm just standing there with my camera. That's like 400 meters from Hezbollah
Oh shit.
that night. Yeah. And we were like in a bowl sort of thing. And I felt very safe down there. Because they would be like up on a ridge behind us. And so like the only real threat to us at that point was like a drone
Hmm.
sort of thing. But the real danger up there is the ATGMs.
Yeah, I've seen
I
that
don't.
video.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like because you'll just be driving and then like you're vaporized, sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was another thing too. I think the Israelis. I don't know. There was an air. I don't know if it was an airstrike killed the AP reporters or
Yeah,
something like that. I think it was like an Israeli airstrike, or I'm
I
sure it was
was up
like,
there,
yeah.
not in that area because that was on the Lebanese side of the border, I believe.
Yeah, I was gonna say they were in Lebanon, right? Because I think some
I
people thought they were like
believe they
in
were
Israel.
standing in an area that had fired rockets prior.
Hmm.
I'm not sure. I really don't know, but I was told by IDF soldiers at a shawarma place that same day that rockets had been fired from that area earlier.
Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sucks too because you're like, and then I found out they were in Lebanon. I'm like, oh, not a good place to be. You know what I mean? Like, especially, you know what I mean? Like, it's like obviously you're reporters. I get it. Why don't you get on the Israeli side and report from there? You know, like
Yeah.
you'll be at least be somewhat. I mean, they're bombing Lebanon. It's happening. You know, like they're dropping bombs over there. So, but
Hmm.
which sucks, obviously. Did you make it over to the West Bank, or did you
I did
hang out
not.
and all that?
No,
Okay,
no.
yeah,
I was told if I was going to go, I needed to go with armed security, and being independent press, I could not afford armed security. So
yeah. So what do they feel about that side then? Because and this is one thing I don't know very much about. I've heard about some things about it. And this is where I do plead ignorance on the in because that's where Jerusalem is. That's where all the holy sites are.
mhm.
And from what I understand, the Muslims control it, or it's the PLA that control it, or who can? Because there's like I've heard that Christians can't pray or show your crosses. Same with the Jews. And then
I don't know. I can't speak on that. That was one of
yeah,
the
I
reasons I
know.
wanted to go to
Yeah,
ask Palestinian people about what was going on there.
yeah,
But yeah, and then reporters were getting attacked there as well at the same time. It's
yeah.
like, man, I had a rough experience
Yeah,
already.
and then
So
and as I said, and there's parts of the Israel aspect that I don't know very much about. I know the settlements are an issue,
mhm.
around the West Bank, and no one's really talking about that because everything's focused on Gaza.
And
And
that's the big
yeah,
reason I decided to stay in the South is because
yeah,
that's where like the show
yeah,
was, and so a lot of my trip was actually just hanging out with IDF troops at that frontline area and watching Gaza, if that
mm,
makes sense. So there is point, and it's so weird because you can never do this in Ukraine, where I was
yeah,
literally 600 meters from the fence, like the
hmm,
Gaza fence, and 1 kilometer from the nearest settlement. And we'd be like sitting like on this hill next to IDF soldiers, drinking beer and like eating pizza and
yeah,
stuff like that. There's a picture of me in and I did all of this in Birkenstock sandals, by the way.
yeah. That's
It's like everyone
there you
else is
go.
wearing boots and stuff, and I was just wearing my Birks, like Jesus sandals. But like you can't do that in Ukraine. Like there's so many times I was thinking like in Israel, like I'd be live streaming or like recording and stuff like that, where it's like I would have been killed 50 different times, 50 different ways today.
Yeah. And it
Um,
does feel that way. Ukraine did have that feel where you're like, you really got to
yeah,
button your shit up. It really
yeah,
was,
but
even in
there
living
were
it.
some close calls in
Yeah.
Israel. There were some rockets that came really close. I got some footage of some exploding right outside the door of this kindergarten that I took shelter in, and then I got this on the live stream too that my girlfriend was watching at the time. But Willie OAM and myself were live streaming from Sderot, and this IDF guy walked up and just handed me a popsicle, and he's like, "You take." I was like, "Oh, okay, thanks." So I'm like sitting there, like eating a popsicle, like live streaming with my cell phone, like looking at Gaza, and I hear this buzzing sound, and I'm like, "Is that what I think it is?" And it like gets a little louder. I'm like, "That sounds like a DJI drone." And I was like,
Mhm.
I yell over at Willie because Willie's been in Ukraine too. And I was like, "Willie, do you hear that?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Is it friendly?" And then like we didn't even stop to like think because like the IDF isn't going to be using those little
Yeah, they're not using DJIs.
drones, like because we could hear like ISR drones all the time above us. Those like low droning like
Yeah.
ones, and this was a little right above us.
Yeah.
We couldn't see it, but we could hear it beginning to hover above us. And I was like, I've seen hundreds of videos in Ukraine of what happens next, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, run, and we take off. And we run under this like awning, and there's some IDF troops sitting there smoking. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like,
Yeah.
drone. And they like, oh, like they get up really quick. They
Yeah.
put their
Yeah.
helmets on and rack their rifles.
Yeah.
They go out and they try to shoot it down, but the drone took off.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an anti-tank missile as well, flew right above us. It scared the shit out of us. I'd never heard an anti-tank missile go overhead before.
Mm-hmm. Is that AT coming from Gaza? Like whatever
Yeah.
you guys said? Yeah.
And then that same day, so we were told not to go up on this hill that was off to our right. So this would have been a perfect hill to like set up a tripod on and just record Gaza. Would have been taking mortars and sporadic like rifle fire and ATGM fire.
Mm-hmm.
So the IDF was like, you can hang out with us, but you're not going up there.
Yeah. So that was the other thing too, is that for the drone stuff, there has been a few Hamas videos, but you don't see very much of it. You know, if they were getting success with them, I got to imagine the Israelis picked up on that pretty quick. And like I said, on top of that, they might not have the same amount of drones that, like, say, the Ukrainians or the Russians have.
Yeah, they definitely don't have the volume that Ukraine and Russia has. I've only seen like probably 4 or 5 videos of ordnance being dropped from a drone, and only one was on IDF troops. And since then, like I've asked them too, like guys in Gaza, and they're like, "Yeah, I heard a drone, but other than that, like I didn't see any."
Yeah, yeah. It's almost probably like for reconnaissance and surveillance now.
Yeah.
They don't want to lose them, you know.
Yeah, they're important assets, and they can't replace anything inside of Gaza.
Yeah. And so what are they feeling like then, just overall then? What are the Israelis feeling about after? I mean, they have to imagine, yeah, they want to level it. They want to kill every Hamas terrorist. But I got to imagine that they do. Everyone's thinking about the aftermath. I mean, Israel obviously is. I know Netanyahu just said the other day that Israel's going to have to take over the security of it, as much as they don't want to. What is the general consensus, Because, dude, that's a hard, even I'm like, in my harshest moment, I'm like, push them into the Sinai, make their own Palestinian state, and just get the fuck off our land. You know what I mean? It's kind of because the fact that Hamas is the government, you're fighting a government now. It's that weird, like, yeah, they're terrorists, but they're the government, and they represent the people. And, it's like, there's no concessions in war. It's like the 20th and 21st, well, I should say 21st century wars are, everyone wants to be nice to the enemy, or, well, we got to treat this, the population, they're not a part of it. It's like, well, yeah, they are. And so losers lose, history goes to the winner. But obviously that's kind of harsh. Like, it's not genocide. It's not wiping them off the face of the earth. But at the same time, you don't want people that hate you on your, like, however you spin it, it's like, it's Israeli territory now, they're just letting you stay there. So what is the consensus then of the Israelis, or how do they feel about in aftermath?
The guys I have talked to don't want to endure what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. So basically, I think what they are signing up for is a never-ending, like, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And man, I feel like that's just going to go on for generations.
Yeah.
Because there's no like clear-cut solution to this.
No.
That leaves everybody happy and
No.
no one's population decimated.
Yeah. Well, I think that thing, I agree with you. Like, no one leaves happy. It's like, well, who should leave happy? I think that's kind of that mentality of us, in the 21st century of like, well, everyone's got to walk away happy. It's like, no, they don't. Like, the Germans walk away happy.
Is, like no one leaves truly happy unless the other side is completely dead.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not realistic. It's like the Free
absolutely.
Palestine like objectives is, okay, either kill all the Jews or all the Jews pick up and leave and go somewhere else. It's like that's not realistic.
Yeah.
I think there has to be some government reforms within Palestine. So like Hamas is just gone. Okay.
Yeah.
A new governing body that is less terroristic, I guess. And both sides need to come up with some sort of like 2-state solution that works. And like set borders need to happen, or like Gaza just needs to become its own independent country.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Palestine. Like, this is actually Palestine now. You've got this little strip of land. You do what you want. We're going to have strictly enforced borders.
Yeah.
Something. I don't know.
No, and I agree with that. I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
Conflict, and I'm probably not even being fair to the Palestinian perspective of it. I've just not spoken to a ton of them. I have interviewed civilians inside of Gaza, not nearly as many as Israel, just because of the access and my skin color and my religion and stuff. Like, all of that does play a role. I have way more death threats from one side than the other in my inbox, and I think that speaks a lot about the people involved.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's the tough part and I agree with you. Again, they're not wiping out the Palestinians, but if you don't want them close to you, you can displace them into the Sinai. Or I agree with you too. It's like, well, then put up a wall and say none of you will ever step foot in Israel again. And now you're your own country. Do what you will with it.
There's got to be something. And I definitely don't have the solutions and the answers to it. It's an incredibly nuanced and complex conflict.
Yeah. I agree. And no one walks away happy. But I understand the Israelis. They don't want to be – who the fuck would want to walk around – after all this, what Israeli soldier wants to walk around Gaza? And like they're like, well, it's a cycle of violence. I was like, it'll always be a cycle of violence. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like even if they do all the right stuff, which Israel is doing like 90% of all the right things when it comes to warfare. I mean, they're saving as many civilians as they can. And they don't have to. But there's going to be a generation, no matter what, that are either taught to hate Jews, or they're going to remember that the Israeli army went through and like wiped out half their territory, or wiped out half their town. So it'll always be there, and I think when people are like, we want to stop that, you're not going to stop it. They weren't there for 17 years and they pulled this and they did what they did.
Yeah. I think,
so I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. It's just,
I think what we are really witnessing is the beginning of a much more intense, low-level asymmetric war that'll go on for at least 20 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Like I said, other than the fact that unless they put up borders and just say you're your own country now and you'll never step foot in Israel again, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I think I
don't have the answer. I wish I did.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we'll see how it turns out in the next 2 months. Because, I mean, I think by the new year, they're going to be making those decisions, Because the other thing, too, is like dealing with southern Gaza. I mean, they've cut off the north and they're working on it. So what happens to the south now? Because now you have 200, or not 200, you have 2 million. You have the entire country now and half of what it used to be, So... and then Egypt's like, fuck that. We're not opening up the Rafah gate. You know what I mean? Like,
and, I think that speaks volumes too, is is the cheerleading from a lot of other countries for Hamas, but the refusal to actually take in the
Oh
people
yeah,
from Gaza.
yep. And I think a lot of people have noticed that too, because was it even the Jordanian queen is part Palestinian. They're not taking one Palestinian in. Egypt refuses to. Saudi refuses to. Iran refuses to. Like even Lebanon doesn't even want them. So it speaks volume to what's going on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, like I said, it's no one wins. I agree with you. You know, like no one's happy about the situation, and it's just one of those things where you're like, I think they might have to rip the Band-Aid off one way or the other, you know, and try to fix it. But at the same time, like there, and I think in that region it'll always be, you know, there's always going to be animosity. I mean,
Yeah, and I think that's
yeah,
the thing is people are wanting a fix to this when realistically I don't think there is one. I
no,
think my great grandchildren are going to be having the same conversations
yeah.
with people that they know about. Oh, what do you think should be done about the Israel Palestinian conflict?
Yeah, it's the same
It's like
shit.
I don't know. We could read my great grandfather's book about it.
Yeah, he had an Instagram account that talked
Yeah,
a lot. He had a lot of stories about
yeah.
it. No, I agree with you. I think that is something, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it kind of plays out, because this is the first time I think, like I said, we're watching history in the making, like, you know,
And
'67,
that's the thing too. Is
'73.
like
Yeah.
it's literally. I was explaining to Willie about this, so like why we have to go, sort of thing,
Hmm.
and it's like we got two once in a lifetime wars within 2 years of each other,
Hmm.
and it's like these are huge events that are impacting like billions of people across the globe, and they happen right back to back.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to Willie about it on Signal on the way over there, and it's like, man, we gotta go.
Yeah.
We can't miss this sort of
Yeah.
thing,
The same with, like, you know, we might see three with Taiwan.
bro.
Dude, you know what I mean? Like, you're going for the
Slow down,
trifecta.
man.
I know.
Hey, you want to
That's
know what's sad? You want to know
yeah,
what's actually really, really sad?
yeah.
I've already started building a contact list of Taiwanese civilians and soldiers
Yeah.
just in case.
Well, I'll give you a contact that I made at the American
Yeah.
Veterans Center. So, funny story. I got there. I got sat at a table with the Taiwanese like delegate, the Polish delegate, and the Ukrainian delegate, all in one table. And I was just like solo right there, sitting there randomly. And then I had like a movie star like the next table over. But the Taiwanese guy was really nice, and he was all about, you know, America. He was like I think he was like a retired. I have his contact. I think I still do in my wallet, because I wanted to keep it, because I thought about you and I thought about Chris, and
Mhm.
like doing a story or something in Taiwan. But he was very much like handing it out to the veterans. He's like, it's something to do with some sort of veterans PR thing, you know, with Taiwan.
Mhm.
But yeah, I immediately thought of that. I was like, yeah, man, you're gonna want to get a lot of contacts. And I was thinking the same thing too. I'm like, what happens when that goes south? Because they're an island, you know, and you
I
know,
met two Taiwanese reporters in Sderot.
yeah.
Yeah, they almost got killed by an anti-tank missile.
Oh shit.
You know that hill I was talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, they went up it.
So what do they have to say?
Huh? Oh yeah, they came back down and they're like, "Oh, is there a lot of action here?" And it's like, "Why do you think we're standing down here next to the bomb shelter,
Yeah,
bro?"
yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, well, do you mind if we hang out here?" And it was like, "Well, there's only a couple outlets, so
Yeah.
you should probably find a new spot."
Yeah. Did you talk to them at all about Taiwan or any situation going on there?
Yeah, a little bit. The consensus was like there's not going to be like an international legion like there is with Ukraine. It's basically like whoever's on that island when it starts that's it.
Oh yeah. I think that's the
Yeah.
trouble with the Taiwanese is they are heavily reliant on the U.S. Yeah, except we're not getting to it. I mean, it's kind of like almost like Israel. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that went, but there's no international legion
Yeah.
coming for
And
the
then
IDF. You
they
know.
were talking about they don't think an invasion will ever happen. They think that the Chinese government is going to slowly subvert their elections until Taiwan has leaders who just voted into being part of China.
China, yeah.
I'm like, wow, that sounds like a very Chinese thing to do.
It does, yeah. Well, when people talk about that, we talk about the geopolitics of it. You're like, they're still very webbed into our economy.
Yeah.
They're still, yeah, they might be cozying up to Russia, or Russia's cozying up to them, but I was like, they need us just as much as we need them. Almost, they need us more. I was like,
Yeah.
if we really wanted to, we could cut all ties and be able to do all the stuff we do here. Yeah, it costs a little bit more, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, if things go sideways, and they, align themselves with Russia, or like in an actual war, I don't know how strategic that is for the long term. And like, you're right too. I'm sure the Taiwanese, they're right. It's like they'll just wait it out as much as they can, or they'll try to, go that route, which isn't the worst route. I mean, like I said,
They interviewed a lot of the Marines and the Army's the guys though, but they're all ready to die.
Yeah.
There's some
They're
like pretty
let's do
moto stuff they've said to me in interviews where it's like they all think they're John Barcelona and they're just going to be mowing down Chinese soldiers on beaches and stuff like that. It's like, I will fight them wherever they are in Taiwan, whether it's in the cities, the beaches, or the mountains. It's like, this is going to be their grave. Man, that's pretty moto. We'll see if you can do it.
I was going to say, it is real moto. Not real moto when you got like naval gunships pointed right at your bunker. So, let's see how that goes. But,
we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, everyone's really badass until there's naval gunfire raining on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're
all right, man. Thanks.
It doesn't matter at all.
Well, thanks for coming on. This was awesome. This is the longest now episode. You hold the record. I will probably actually we'll definitely try to link up tomorrow. I definitely want to hear about the going through the tactics in the bunkers and the experiences that they're having in the bunkers.
Yeah, absolutely. So they should message me soon.
Awesome. And then kind of get you, see how the ground fighting's going as well. I imagine he'll have an update on what's going on. And as much as everybody.
Yeah, a whole lot of them got back yesterday and they're kind of resting, recouping, and then they're going to be answering all my interview questions tomorrow. I had like a list of like 20, 25 questions for them. So
hell yeah, that's awesome. Now I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Should be some pretty good stuff.
Awesome. Well, where can everybody find you?
You can find me primarily on Instagram and YouTube. It's on Instagram. It's battles.and.beers. And on YouTube, I am Battles and Beers War Stories.
Awesome. Sweet. Thanks for coming on, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.